For most of us, our deer rifles fall somewhere between a simple hunting tool and a family relic. We love our deer guns, and that's because they were there with us for some of the best moments of our lives. All that passion is a good thing, but there's one tiny problem with this. Our love for our own guns blinds us to even very simple ballistic principles. We take a few anecdotes from the field, and then we apply them as scientific fact across the board. Now, this tendency has led to arguments in deer camps and Northwoods bars, and it has generated thousands, or millions, of outrage comments on the internet. It has also fueled some common myths and misconceptions about deer rifles, cartridges, and shooting. I'm Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson, and I'm here to say that we at Outdoor Life believe that you can love your deer rifle and also have a clear-eyed perspective on the modern shooting world. So in hopes of busting some of those biggest myths around deer rifles and deer shooting, today on the podcast we have our very own shooting editor, John B. Snow. Hey, John, before we get into these deer hunting myths and misconceptions, just give a little background about your deer hunting experience and deer shooting experience.
You know, I've had kind of an interesting trajectory, so to speak, with all of that. My earliest deer hunting experiences were classic northern Michigan whitetail hunting in the sort of the tamarack swamps and blinds and so forth. You know, sometimes back when they were still doing it over piles of apples. And my deer hunting career, such as it is, you know, really started with that type of hunting. And so that's always been very near and dear to me. You know, that was lever guns and you know, still hunting through swamps in the hope of, you know, kicking up that big 30-point buck and all that stuff. And then as time went on, I started focusing more on the West, and you know, have certainly, you know, in these last, you know, 15, 20 years have pivoted pretty strongly to Western style open country, spot and stalk to type deer hunting. And you know, and of course, just over the years, I've had the chance to deer hunt across the country, you know, pretty much everywhere, you know, Coues deer and Carmen whitetail down in Texas, and, you know, classic Southern hunts and Northwood stuff and the Western stuff. So I've been really lucky that way. It's kind of been all over the place.
This is maybe an impolite question or an impolite way to ask this, but what's the closest you've ever killed a deer, and what's the farthest shot you've ever made on a deer?
Oh, well, closest has been damn close. I mean, I've had, you know, basically deer tink their little antlers at the on the ladder of my stand. Close. So, you know, that's like
that one didn't get away.
Yeah, that's like the old Rambo jumping out of the tree on top of the pig close. You know, so yeah. You know, that I suppose that's at one end of the spectrum. You know, it's funny. I guess I don't really know what my longest shot per se is on deer. I mean, I've certainly taken some deer at a bit over 500 yards, I think. I mean, I know I have, you know, but I've never been one to sort of use that as a metric of success. So a bit over 500 yards.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason why I ask is just because I think that shows a broad experience that you bring to this conversation, which is important because I think there's a little bit of separation of camps, you know, of kind of like the, you know, the woods close range deer hunters who have a certain skill set, and then the, you know, more open country hunters who are shooting at farther ranges and they have a certain skill set. And I think those two camps kind of disagree with each other on a lot of these things. But you, in some ways, belong to both. So that's why I kind of think you're the perfect guy to have this conversation. And with that, let me give you the first one. The 6.5 Creedmoor is just an overrated deer hunting round.
Oh, man, you're just kicking the hornet's nest right out of the gate.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start from the top with a good one. It's overrated. The 6.5 Creedmoor is overrated.
It's so overrated. It's just become the number one big game cartridge of the modern era. That's how overrated it is, and it's.
Can it even kill a big Midwestern whitetail buck? Is it capable of it?
Well, according to a lot of people, no. It is fascinating, and I love traditional cartridges and deer calibers and so forth. My heart really belongs to the 35 Remington, in my old Marlin lever action, so I have a feel for the nostalgia. But no, the 6.5 Creedmoor isn't overhyped, and it is an extraordinarily capable big game round, and is more than sufficient for any whitetail that trots across the face of North America. There's no question about it. It is just a wonderfully balanced, inherently accurate round that is easy to shoot, has relatively mild recoil, is manageable for people, and also is the type of cartridge. It's not the only one, but it is the type of cartridge that is going to promote and encourage people to practice and become better marksmen. And it has the advantage that moderate recoil has a lot of advantages I think often get overlooked by the fans of the 300s and like the really big boomers, where in terms of follow-up shots, it's a lot better if and when you need one. For just visually seeing where the animal went after the shot. I mean, anybody who's hunted in thick country knows how important that is.
Yeah.
And so if you have a cartridge that helps you get back in the scope quicker to see what happened to the animal, that counts for a lot. And, I think that sometimes in the rage against the 6.5 Creedmoor, some of those qualities get overlooked pretty quickly. People have a pretty narrow metric for what they consider cartridge performance. And most people think about performance purely in terms of muzzle velocity. So they'll say, well, this cartridge spits out this bullet faster, therefore it is a better performer.
Right. And
that's not a very sophisticated way of looking at cartridge performance. There's more that goes into it than just muzzle velocity.
Yeah, which gets us to our next one, which is like I need to shoot a 300 Win Mag or some kind of similar cartridge because I need that knockdown power. When I shoot a deer, I want to just drop him right there, knock him down. And that's why I'm going with those big 30 calibers. What do you say about that?
Yeah, well, I've been guilty of using, I think, the term knockdown power in the past, but that's really also a misunderstanding of terminal ballistics. There is no such thing as knockdown power with a cartridge. To get a little nerdy about it, bullets kill only in a couple of ways. One, they take out the central nervous system, so a spinal shot or I guess a brain shot is the kind of thing that turns the power off instantly. And then there's exsanguination, blood loss. Those are the two, and blood loss is through tissue destruction, through tissue damage. So how the bullet behaves within the target and also where that bullet is placed in the target, those are the things that define how effectively a particular bullet or cartridge kills. It doesn't knock it down. So if you start to think about, the terminal effectiveness of a cartridge in those terms, that kind of shifts it a little bit too, where bullets that are smaller, that are again driven at moderate velocities can do basically as much damage, in some cases even more, depending on the bullet selection, than a big boomer. And then, of course, there's also the X factor. It's just sample size of people's experience.
Yeah.
For example, I was just talking with a really good buddy of mine. He's one of my kind of shooting partners out here in Montana. He's a custom rifle builder, and he just did an elk hunt with a 300 PRC. Big, powerful 30 caliber Magnum, and it was for a cow elk. And he hit that cow elk with a 212 grain ELD, I mean, just a monster bullet.
Yeah.
And the bullet, passed through the chest and, double lung shot and all that, but that elk, ran about 100 yards before she expired. And based on that, if a guy's one and only elk hunt was with that shot, they would suddenly be convinced that elk are like the world's toughest animal. I mean, holy cow, I put it right through her,
Right.
and that's just a cow.
Right.
God only knows what you need for a bull. So I think that hunters who travel to the West who maybe have an experience like that, or because they're shooting that big 300 that they've never shot before, they just don't shoot it very well, which is a real problem. They put a marginal shot into the animal, have difficulty recovering the animal, and all of a sudden, it's like, well, my God, it's because I didn't use enough gun.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many deer does the average hunter really get to shoot with a variety of cartridges? Your personal experience means so much to you, but kind of in like a data analysis, none of that, there's just not enough sample size to really, sadly make any of it meaningful, which is, people don't want to hear that, right? Because you were hunting with your dad one time and he shot that big buck with a 30-06 and it dropped in its tracks. And ever since then, like, you have that, and that's a meaningful experience to you, but, it's a data point.
Yeah, it's a data point one. And if you've had success with that rifle and with that cartridge, especially if you're, new to the hunting scene, that is going to become your touchstone of excellence. That is going to be the definition of the perfect rifle and deer cartridge. And you know what? Good for you.
Yeah.
You should root for your equipment, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing really wrong with that. Okay, let's keep going on the big boomer, big bullet bandwagon here. Those heavier bullets in, the 30 caliber range, those are better at busting through the brush though, right? Like those will, if we're hunting in the woods, those will punch through, grass and twigs and stuff the way that, maybe smaller calibers won't.
Oh man, this is a very interesting line of argumentation as well. What constitutes a brush busting cartridge? I think before we go into this, though, I'm going to preface this with I had a conversation with Jim Carmichael, my predecessor, shooting editor here years ago, talking about brush busting cartridges, and he said to me, John, whenever anybody talks about brush busting cartridges, I always just have to ask myself, what exactly are they shooting at?
Yeah.
and there's something to that, except for very rare circumstances, we should not be shooting through brush at all, because it will deflect and potentially damage the bullet and cause all sorts of introduce all sorts of vectors of chaos into the shot. That said, we have done some really interesting experimentation that has had some kind of intriguing results. Tyler Friel, our staff writer and our mountain man up in Alaska, just did a really cool analysis of several different cartridges and bullet styles shooting through brush, as is typical where he lives up there, and for a lot of us, frankly. And it seems like the key takeaway from that is bullet construction. It was the all copper monometal bullets that behaved the best going through brush. And when you think about it, that actually makes sense. They are going to be least prone to being damaged as they fly through twigs and grass and so forth, compared to a cup and core bullet, or certainly even a slightly thicker jacketed bonded bullet. And so the evidence such as we have now points more to the bullet style than necessarily going to a particular cartridge. That said, and this will warm the hearts of a lot of people, the one that performed the best was the old 4570.
Wow.
Shooting those all copper bullets, man. So for the traditionalists out there, or people who are into the 4570, that was kind of the good news in terms of what seems to be, based on our testing, the most effective brush busting bullet and cartridge.
Yeah. So if you're not shooting the 4570, you don't really have a brush buster, and you should not be shooting through the brush if you can avoid it at all costs.
If you can avoid it. Even with the 4570, I wouldn't take that initial shot. Sometimes you're going to have maybe a quick follow-up shot on an animal, and you're going to have to stick one, through some cover and hope for the best. And in those cases, it would just seem that the bullets with the biggest chance of success are going to be larger caliber and all copper monometal type bullets.
Yeah. I keep asking you about cartridges and you keep talking about bullets, which is just like not nearly as fun to argue about on the internet. So does it even matter? I mean, does it, if you're just kind of an average deer hunter, does it even really matter what cartridge you're going with?
Actually, it's kind of funny that you say that because I'm not doing that intentionally, but really it's actually sort of a somewhat profound point, which is that, people do talk about cartridges a lot. And, I think certainly back in the day, you rewind the clock 30, 40, 50 years, we had, a good selection of cartridges, but a really minimal selection of bullets. There were not many bullets, and those bullets weren't very good for the most part. They were prone to, failure being defined as, not being able to perform properly in game to kill them, and we live in this, sort of a golden era of riflery and hunting anyway, but a big portion of that are these amazing bullets that we have to choose from today, that have kind of cropped up in the last, 20 years or so. And so when, looking at, sort of a hunting scenario or whatever, I think that the bullet selection question really trumps the cartridge question. There are certain types of situations where one cartridge will perform better. For my open country hunting, I want stuff that can reach out there and is, will buck the wind. The wind's a big thing, and so on and so forth. And that's going to be different than a close-up brush hunt. But sort of taking away those two extremes, sort of in the middle there, I think it really does come down more to bullet selection than cartridge choice. And we're lucky to have that be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of going off of that old days of less sophisticated, poor performing bullets. I think one thing that deer hunters do have nostalgia for is the old days of rifles. And I feel like there's this kind of belief that, rifles back then in air quotes, however you want to describe it, 60s, 70s, 80s, kind of the guns of our fathers, maybe. Those rifles are better made than the guns we have today.
Oh my God, nothing could be further from the truth. Those guns are universally junk compared to what we put out today.
I can hear my grandfather getting out of his armchair to come give you a whooping right now, John.
Look, part of this revolution that I talked about with the bullets and riflery, you look at the introduction of all of this precision CNC machining that is now commonplace in the gun industry, and it's allowed companies, large and small, to manufacture barrels and actions to such a degree of precision and perfection that you can really literally buy the components yourself, screw them together, and have a really high-performing rifle. Whereas if you look at like a classic like 700 from back in the day, and this isn't even that long ago, their ability to control even just the head spacing on the barrel was so poor that they would have, a series of bolts to try, to mix and match to get it to close correctly on the gauges they used to deem the rifle whether it was in or out of spec. And I'm picking on Remington here, but that was, for any mass-produced rifle, that was a common issue. The one exception would have been Savage, that had their innovative barrel nut method of head spacing, which allowed them to control the head spacing sort of while still not having this like just screw together CNC level of precision and exactitude with their rifle construction. The one thing I will say though, and here I'll throw a little bone to the traditionalists, one of the things that's been kind of sad to see is that we have lost some of the craftsmanship in gun building that we used to have, specifically in terms of checkering and nice wood stock. There's still gun builders and high-end gun makers who are doing really nice wood checkering and so forth on guns, but that really is kind of a dying art and in this day and age. And that is one thing where we don't have the benefit of that with our modern guns, as everything has gone to synthetics or in some cases laminates. and the checkering, such as you do see, is often executed by machine, and it looks okay, but you can tell it's been done by machine. There's some companies that do really nice machine checkering, but even that, it's almost like it's not valued the same way anymore. So I think we have lost something there.
Do you think that's where that kind of misconception comes from a little bit? Is like less kind of looking at the performance of the rifle and maybe just kind of looking at, I don't know, those things that you're talking about, the kind of nostalgic look and feel of the gun versus what it's actually doing on the range or in the field?
Yeah, but I do think a lot of our judgment is clouded by nostalgia. A really good example, salient example, are the new Marlins being made by Ruger. We obviously tested one of those, and I've hunted with it quite a bit, and you remember I was really impressed with the quality of that gun. And just to back up a little bit, where I grew up in Connecticut was right near the Marlin factory. So Marlin was kind of my hometown gun, right? And, I can't even tell you how many Marlins I own. I mean, I own a pile of them. And as much as I love my old Marlins, when you compare side by side those old Marlins with that new Ruger, the fit and finish, the quality of the engraving and stuff, and the stamping on the metalwork, there is no comparison. It is by far the best made sort of mass-produced factory Marlin, and maybe there's some exceptions from way, way back when, historically, but it's a much, much better gun. That said, I've got some old CZ rifles, and one of the things I love about those rifles is you can look at sort of how complicated the machining is on the actions, and you can see the evidence of like the hand file work and other things that went into making that gun kind of come together. And so there is something that I really like about seeing quality handwork in a rifle, but the handwork was there because they needed it versus what we have now, which is a lot cleaner and just, again, more precisely fitting components in the rifles today. So,
yeah, along those lines, like thinking about the nostalgia, you've got kids who are of hunting age, old enough to hunt. I've got a daughter, who's 2, but, I'm still dreaming about her going to deer camp someday. What types of guns do you think we're going to be kind of handing down to our kids, deer rifles, handing down to our kids is like, oh, this is like this is dad's gun. Do you have an idea of like what that's going to look like, or is that just kind of less clear now because there's such a variety of different types of rifles available to us?
Well, there is such a wide range of rifles out there. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's gonna look like it did before. It's gonna be a favorite Winchester. It's gonna be if Remington can unscrew themselves from the pit that they're in, it'll be a Remington or a Savage or a Ruger. Mm-hmm. Those are still the mass produced and therefore most common rifles. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. And obviously you have, especially as parents get their kids into hunting and get a little more savvy about stuff, you're going to see people gravitating towards stocks like Savage's AccuStock system that you can kind of grow with the shooter, things that have modularity to them. I mean, that's the other thing that we've really seen with today's rifles with all this precision is that we can make kind of these components that mix and match with them, seamlessly without any issue. Not that the guns have become Lego guns exactly, but that's not the worst analogy either. Is that we can kind of quickly customize and modify these things with shocking efficiency compared to what it would have required to do that in the past.
We'll be right back after the break.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Let's move from this nostalgic now to the more practical. The kind of popularity of long-range shooting, from the types of bullet cartridge development the type of rifles available to us now, and just like all the excitement and interest in competitive shooting. That all is cool and interesting, fun to read about, but that has nothing to do with deer hunting.
Well, wrong. I'll tell you what, I think I would separate those into two things. There's the long range shooting, and certainly part of that is the long range competition. You know, I mean, for competition, targets placed, you know, at farther distances are going to be more interesting to engage with. And while the pure long range shooting I agree, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the deer hunting, and we'll get to that in a second. The thing about competition, though, is that learning how to handle your equipment under, especially like practical shooting equipment, under a time stress where you have to maybe find a target, you know, range it, and then build a position to engage it. Learning how to do that under stress and being able to make a hit at whatever the distance is unbelievably valuable for deer hunters. One of the points of fascination and frustration for me is when I'm with people in camp or whatever who are really experienced hunters. They're good hunters. But when the moment of truth comes to make that shot, it is just an absolute mess. I witnessed the same types of mistakes again and again and again. And it's that moment of truth that, you know, I wish more people put time into mastering.
The mistakes that you see, are those just like there's no process that they're going through, or like what does it kind of look? What does that mess kind of look like, so people have an idea?
Well, the mess can, you know, there are a bunch of like typical things that'll happen. Often the scope is dialed up way too high. That's a very common one, you know, and there's a lot of drawbacks to having the magnification on your scope cranked way up, narrower field of view, less forgiving positioning of the eye, less light transmission. It's a dimmer image, and on and on. That's a big one. Another big one is just the inability to identify the right shooting position in a given scenario. So, for example, I was hunting with somebody who's a friend of mine who's a really damn good hunter, and we spotted a deer just downhill from us at about 70 yards standing in the brush, a very makeable shot. And like he sort of said, hey, I mean, can you hit that deer offhand? Because that would be the only
shot available
there. And I was like, yeah, can't you? It's only 70 yards away.
You're kind of like, why are we talking and not shooting?
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and that should have been, you know, for somebody who's been in competition, where maybe you do, and I've had that scenario a bunch of times. We have a series of targets, and maybe the first target is super close, but the only way to see it, you can't lay down. You have to stand up and shoot it. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, a 70-yard offhand shot on a deer should be just an automatic shot for anybody. But until you've practiced these things and have been deliberate about it, you know, you might not have developed that skill set or that process that you talked about. And shooting competitively really helps you refine that process. So even if a given stage is not realistic for your hunting scenario, maybe the targets are too far or whatever, you know, just going through that process of learning how to handle a stage. And then the good thing is, as soon as the stage is done, you know, you can assess how you did. Maybe you just totally screwed the pooch, but it's done. And you can think about it a little bit and process it. So I don't think there's anything better to help develop baseline deer hunting skills than some of these practical shooting competitions.
If you're a deer hunter, you know, kind of average, everyday deer hunter who really likes to shoot and wants to get better, wants to improve their skills and have fun in one of these competitions, but doesn't want to like make this their life's effort, What kind of competition should you like look at getting into? What kind of shooting competition?
The shooting competition series, one of them I've been really getting into is the NRL Hunter series.
Okay.
And it is, you know, it would be the one that I would probably recommend the most for people. And one thing that's kind of nice about that series is that typically these started as these 2-day matches, which are pretty intense. it's a financial commitment, a time commitment. But they've been doing more of these one-day matches where the bar's a bit lower, the time commitment, the money commitment is lower. And I think for anybody who's interested in this, look up, keep tabs on the NRL Hunter Series and look for some of those one-day matches, because often the people running them will also do a skills clinic. And I think, just bring what you have. It's a very generous community. So if there's a piece of something that you're missing, chances are people will let you borrow it and they'll help you figure it out. And I think, the initial thing to do is to go in there with the goal of just kind of getting through the competition. You're not going to win. You're not going to maybe even do very good. But what it'll do is it'll certainly put into stark relief some of the things you need to work on. So that would be one. The other thing, I would also look at just some of these little rimfire competitions. Those are easy. They're often done at indoor ranges. They involve some positional stuff. I think that those two things, those two types of competitions are really worth looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of on that note, like there's a lot of great gear, rifles, equipment that, you can compete with, you can hunt with, like do it all. And a lot of those rifles are extremely accurate. Like they will promise MOA or sub MOA, kind of openly. They'll send you targets. Some of the guns, they'll send you targets with a group that proves that this gun at one time shot sub MOA. So is it the case now that a deer rifle just should shoot sub MOA? And if your deer rifle doesn't shoot sub MOA, it's not really acceptable? Yeah,
it's funny. When the first company that did that kind of big accuracy guarantee back in the day was Weatherby. This was in the 80s that they started that, where they promised that their rifles would, within 3 shots, do an 1.5-inch group. And that was in response to all of these crappy old rifles that we talked about from back in the day that, a guy might get and the thing might...
Cover your ears, Grandpa.
Yeah, exactly. It might not shoot real well. And so they would send it back to Winchester or Remington, and, Winchester or Remington would look at it and then send it back to the guy and say, well, it's in spec. And, they never knew what spec was. It was never defined. And Weatherby, said, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to have this accuracy guarantee. And then over time, Weatherby improved that to their sub MOA, 3 shots within, an inch. And then with all the CNC stuff and all the precision stuff, everybody started doing these accuracy guarantees to the point where some of it's gotten ridiculous. There was one custom gun maker who was guaranteeing 1/4 MOA accuracy guarantee with their rifle, which is just nonsense, frankly.
Yeah.
Because how do you even define that? Did it do it once? Does it do it 10 out of 10 times, which it won't, and so forth? So I think that this whole obsession with these targets and the sub MOA stuff has kind of clouded the reality of what even competitive shooters need, let alone deer hunters.
Yeah.
We shoot thousands and thousands of rounds through dozens of guns every year. And so we have our 5-shot group size protocol and stuff. And so we have a huge data set to look at. And really, still most rifles, on average, across readily available or someday readily available factory ammo, but common factory ammo loads, if it shoots 1 1/4 inch on average 5-shot groups, that's a damn good rifle. And there's nothing wrong with it. Will it shoot better sometimes with some ammo? Sure, it will. But I wouldn't get, if I were looking at a rifle and, somehow it wasn't shooting sub MOA every time, it's not going to do that. Chances are it's not going to do that. So I wouldn't get wrapped around the axle about that at all.
There's a little bit of a trick, a little bit of a marketing trick there too, right? With those super, small group size, like guarantees. Because you kind of don't want to be the guy who's like, oh, they promise that this rifle can shoot half MOA, but I'm not getting half MOA. Maybe it's me. Maybe I don't want to admit that I can't shoot half MOA, but I'm sure this rifle can.
Well, exactly. And especially the more expensive the rifle, there's a feeling, and this isn't for everybody, but you're kind of gearing your way into competence. And damn it, they sent you the target, so with that gun, so yeah, the proof's right there. And so it kind of puts it all on you. And I think there is a sense where most guys are not even going to be willing to challenge the performance if they can't match it. And they won't, because the thing is, most companies are on the up and up, but you don't know how many groups they put down range. You don't even know at what distance they actually shot the targets. There's so much kind of nonsense around that. I would personally, I just ignore those targets 100%. And I just start shooting, and what the gun tells me, that's what it tells me. And that's a much more valid data set. I would just ignore those targets.
Yeah. Yeah. This isn't a myth or misconception, but I'm just curious about it. Would you, and you don't have to name brands if you don't want to, but you can if you want to too. Can you just kind of run through what your ideal deer hunting rig would be for kind of the three main types of deer hunting scenarios, which, one is kind of like the big woods. Two would be kind of like, think typical like Midwestern or Southern deer habitat, whitetail habitat, which is like part agriculture, part timber. And then three would be like that open country, Western plains hunting for whitetails. Would you kind of just run through what your ideal rig for each of those three would look like?
Sure. With the Northwoods thing, again, because I'm such a lever gun guy, I'm gonna want to have a lever gun, and I'm gonna have a low power variable optic on it, like a 1-6. Mm-hmm. For a long time, that was basically my go-to rig. And again, I did a lot of hunting with my 35 Remington and have a tremendous amount of confidence in those 200 grain soft points and what they do. I mean, it's just very satisfying to hunt with that. It's fast, it's handy, it's nostalgic. It has it sort of fits the environment. So that would be where I would go on the Northwood side. Certainly just a fast handling, nimble gun that has an optic with a 1x low end magnification.
Yeah.
Going to the other end of the spectrum on the open country side of things, I become a big fan of the 6.5 PRC. Just as a balanced open country round, man, that thing is just difficult to beat. Great bullet selection, tremendous accuracy, has a little more ass to it than the 6.5 Creedmoor, sort of in a given load, a couple hundred feet per second.
Yeah.
And just wonderful bullet selection to choose from. So for, stretching out for like that 500-yard type shot and really understanding the wind. I mean, the wind is such a big factor. And so if you don't have a rifle that you shoot a lot in the wind, you can't consider yourself, I think, having mastered that style of hunting.
Yeah.
Or you just have to really put hard limits on yourself.
Yeah.
We have a saying in competition and out here, respect the wind. And you have to respect the wind. The figuring out the elevation drop at a distance, that's easy.
Yeah.
That's not difficult. That's just basic math. And so assuming we have, sort of a baseline of skill to establish that our drops are good at different distances, now it becomes an issue of building a solid shooting position and mastering the wind. And so a cartridge like the 6.5 PRC is one that's just ideally suited not only to handle the wind, but also to master the wind, because it's a fun cartridge to shoot.
Yeah.
It's not going to beat you up like the way a sporter weight 300 PRC would, for example.
Yeah.
So, something that's balanced like that, gets my nod for open country shooting. With the Southern kind of, sort of the piney woods type thing, and then there's the bean field side of things, there's so much variety down there. Those shots can be, I've hunted, some of that like South Carolina low country. I mean, it's swamp, it's just tight and just as thick as anything, where it's going to be that 20-foot shot or 20-yard shot max. But then you can get into some of those ag fields down there where you might end up looking at 350 yards or something across a field where a bunch of the deer is obscured. And so,
right.
So you want something that's handy, that will maneuver well in a blind as well, so you don't want some 26-inch barreled monstrosity ideally. So I think you want kind of a compact, handy gun. It doesn't have to be ultralight because you're not going to be stalking long with it. And in fact, having a little bit of weight in the rifle is going to be a good thing just for steadiness and recoil management.
Right.
So I think having a bolt action with a pretty capable scope, something like a 3-12, and then maybe weighs about 9 pounds all in.
Yeah.
I think that would be the way to go. Cartridge selection, sort of the world is your oyster.
Yeah.
Certainly you're not going to go wrong with something like the 6.5 PRC for the open country stuff, but anything, a good, I've got a compact 308 that I built for hunting blacktails in Oregon and some of that thicker stuff, and that's got a short barrel on it, but it's just a tack driver. And so, something like that sort of that handy 308, man, that'd be tough to beat. And readily available ammo, lots of accurate ammo. Again, a gun that'll be fun to shoot and practice with too.
Yeah. Something you mentioned there got me thinking about one last misconception for you, I think, is that 6.5 PRC, yeah, that's all great for long-range shots, or longer shots, let's just say. But the bullets, the kind of new modern bullets, at close range, when you get that 20-yard shot, they're either just going to punch through, not expand, or they're just going to shrapnel and not penetrate. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, this goes back to the bullet selection thing, right? You've got a lot of choices there. One of the things that's kind of interesting is that for those closer shots, for example, a really good choice can be some of those monolithic bullets. They will expand reliably at those high impact velocities. They're going to punch through that animal, penetrate deeply, and especially in thicker areas, having 2 leaky holes in a deer. One helps with that process of the exsanguination, so that it dies. 2, it leaves a much more readily identifiable blood trail.
Right.
So for close up shots, a tougher bullet actually, can be a better choice because it can be really nice to have that pass through. Whereas if you went with let's just go to the other end, like a match bullet, there's some match bullets that are really good at killing game, but there is the chance of that bullet just grenading on the inside and not exiting on the other side. And you're going to still end up with an incredibly dead deer. But, if, depending on where you hit it, it kind of goes back to that thing about the cow elk that my buddy shot. You can never predict how an animal's going to behave.
Yeah.
At the shot. And so if you have a situation where you don't have a good blood trail and that animal, maybe it was alert or already moving or something like that, and it takes off, well, now you can have a much more challenging recovery on your hands because you don't have a good blood trail to follow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but again, we're back at bullet selection, not cartridge selection.
Yeah.
That issue can happen with any, sort of in any scenario. Again, the 300 PRC on the cow elk,
right,
with that 212 grain bullet. Nobody can say that's not enough gun. And that punched through. That was a pass through as well.
Yeah.
But it just so happened that bullet on that animal at that point, she took off. And,
yeah,
and if you extrapolate that back to our thick covered deer scenario, that could be, especially if you just have the one entrance hole and no exit hole, that can make for a pretty challenging recovery.
Yeah. Okay. Well, last question for you here, John. As this podcast comes out, there's going to be a lot of people just kind of gearing up for their deer camps, getting their rifles ready. Some rifle seasons are already underway. What would you just kind of give as like a general tip? Just like one kind of thing for us all to be thinking about as we're heading out to our stands with our rifles, like ready to make that shot, hopefully on that big buck that we've been waiting for all season.
What I would do is I would, think about where you're going, where you're hunting, and sort of game out a bunch of shooting scenarios and think about what it is you might encounter. Is it a buck that's going to, jump up out of brush and you might have to take a quick shot on it that way? Is it a longer shot? Is it something where you're still hunting and you might need to find a quick improvised position? What I would do is I would game out your hunting scenario, and then I would just practice at the range beforehand and just kind of go through some of the motions of that. Just sort of mentally create a checklist of things to do that are specific to your style of hunting, and, put a box of ammo downrange. Even that will be a benefit, sort of, and do it in an intentional way where you are thinking about your hunt. And so that when the time comes and that hopefully that buck of your dreams steps out, it will be a more automatic process for you to make that shot. And we owe that to the animal anyway.
Yeah.
That's the other side of it.
Yeah. It's like a little bit of visualization there, maybe from your competition practice, kind of thinking of what the scenarios are going to be and how you're going to react.
Absolutely. And, you can follow that. And as you get more proficient, there are other layers to that mental game that come into play. But as a baseline, look at what your hunt is and do some visualization and then do some practice based on that imagery, and that will yield some good results for you.
Hey, thanks, John. This has been really interesting. I'm going to go make sure my 6.5 Creedmoor is sighted in and ready to go because it's going to deer camp this fall.
Outstanding. Yeah, no, this was a great conversation, man. I really appreciate it.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited and produced by me, Senior Deputy Editor Natalie Krebs. It's hosted by our Editor-in-Chief, Alex Robinson, and our guest today was our very own shooting editor, John B. Snow. Music in this episode was composed and performed by Julian Burrell via APM Music.